Antonio Buehler of Buehler Education.
All right. So, I don't know how everyone came to their place in life so that they could be here. No, this is fine. This is fine. Okay. All right. So, I don't know how everyone got to this place in their life where they ended up here at the Free State Project, PorcFest. Everyone has their own different path. And for me, my thing happened in 2008, 2009. A lot of it had to do because of what was going on politically, and then what I was doing, as far as my readings. But another thing was what I was doing professionally. And I was operating sort of a financial private equity play where I had people who were backing me to look for a company that I could buy, which I would then run. And I was looking in the education space because I always really cared about children. I wanted to help them out. I felt that education was the way to help them out. And so I got really into the whole education reform movement. I became a big advocate of charter schools and vouchers. And the more that I dove into that, as I was looking for charter management organizations to run or curriculum providers, the more I realized that I could do that for a career and make money, but I wasn't really going to help many kids. What I was going to do is maybe help a couple thousand kids. I'd make a lot of money off of fooling people into thinking that we were helping the children when actually we were just moving stuff around. Kids were still getting traditional, linear type educations, coercive education in the public schools, the charter schools, and the private schools. And so as part of my political, philosophical evolution, I decided that I was going to spend my professional efforts, my professional career, focus on helping parents understanding what homeschooling is and helping them figure out how best to do that. And there's a lot of people who advocate for unschooling, particular methods of homeschooling, and traditional schooling as well. And I don't think that there is a best method. There's a best method for every individual person, but every individual learns in different ways and they respond to information in different ways. And the best thing that we can do is really harness how they learn in order to provide a really good educational environment for them, whether that's unschooling or homeschooling or even some more traditional schools. It really depends on where that kid is. But at about that time when I sort of went over the cliff, I said, okay, I'm going to focus on homeschooling. I moved to Austin, Texas, and then I had some troubles in Austin, which John talked about, fighting with the man, and I sort of lost focus on that because I was so focused on finding the police. But I'm going to go back to ed school this year, and hopefully that will allow me to take a step back from a lot of the police activism that I'm doing and put some more time and effort into education. Amongst this crowd, I acknowledge that there's a lot of people who are already there when it comes to this idea of homeschooling their kids. There's not a lot of people, I would think, in this community who are saying to themselves right now, I can't wait to send my kids to public school because that's going to provide them great opportunities and they're going to learn a lot. Most people that I talk to want to homeschool, will homeschool, or if they don't think they can, they say that they want to, and they're at least looking for alternatives. Is there a private school that works for them? Is there a charter school that works for them? And if I had the opportunity to talk every single day, I would have a conversation about learning styles. I would have a conversation about how to best homeschool your child based on what their goals are, but I don't have that much time. So today, I'm going to talk about higher education opportunities for homeschoolers. But even if your kid isn't homeschooled, or if you don't plan on homeschooling, I think that this conversation will still be beneficial. Now, why is it that the people outside of our community are so often focused on education and sending their kids to elite colleges like Harvard and Princeton and Yale? And why is it that within the community, it seems like we actually discount that, and we actually don't, not everyone, but a lot of people don't want their kids to go to college. They don't want their kids to go to Harvard. They think that they're indoctrination centers, which they are, and they think that it will hamper their ability to act as a grown-up, as an individual, as an entrepreneur, and that's true. It does to some degree. And why push off for another 4 years what they could be doing today? And those are all really good questions. I'm going to argue today that from an individual standpoint, for the children, future young adults, whatever you want to say, for them, oftentimes the best alternative for them is to go to one of these colleges. Certainly not for everyone, but for a lot of people, it really is the best alternative for them. And so we should help them get there if that's what they're trying to do. And two, because this is PorcFest and because it's all about liberty, I would actually argue that sending our children to these elite universities is actually good to expand liberty, liberty in our lifetime, right? And so that's going to be my focus. And I want to talk first about the individual child, or the young adult, what they're trying to do with their life. There's a lot of people out there who are going to say, we don't need, my child doesn't need to go to Harvard. My child doesn't need to go to Stanford. They're going to be an entrepreneur, or they're going to be a machinist. And in those cases, you're absolutely right. The child does not need to go to an elite university. If they want to be an engineer, they don't even need to go to an elite university. They need to go to a school that has a decent engineering program that will allow them to pass the engineering exam and get them a job that will allow them to pass the professional engineering exam, for example, right? If you're going to be a salesperson, you don't need to go to college. And you certainly don't need to go to an elite university. Some of the best salespeople don't go to college. They just go ahead and work on their craft, and they get better at it, and they can sell refrigerators to Eskimos, and that's fine. If that's the path that they want to go down, then that's great. I'm not saying that anyone should go to these elite universities if that's their goal in life, but a lot of people want to become doctors, right? And a lot of people want to become investment bankers. A lot of people want to go into technology, and they want to create these connections with people in Silicon Valley and whatnot. And there you don't even have to go to college, but it certainly helps if you go to Stanford or Berkeley or MIT. So I'm suggesting that parents, even if they don't think that their kids should be going down that path, or that their kids won't want to do that stuff, they're going to be entrepreneurs someday, don't project on them too much. At least give them the tools necessary to be able to be in position in the future academically so that they can go ahead and make that leap into those universities. And specifically with these elite universities, I think that if they're going to go to college and they're going to spend a ton of money and take on a bunch of debt and be out of the workforce for 4 years, it does make sense to seriously consider whether or not we're going to be sending them to, whether or not they want to go, and you as a parent, if you'll support them, to elite universities. Because when you look at the numbers, when it comes to certain professions, like the most prestigious law firms, if they want to be a lawyer, I don't know why, but if they want to become great researchers, professors, if they want to even go into politics, there's a lot of reasons why they're best set going to one of these elite universities, right? If you look at Yale Law School, which is the cream of the crop, Yale Law School, the top feeders into Yale Law School in college are Yale, Harvard, and Stanford. The other top 3 law schools are Harvard and Stanford, and the top feeders into those 2 schools are Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, right? And so if your kid wants to become a Supreme Court justice, the first ever libertarian, they want to become a Supreme Court justice, then you want to help them position themselves so that they have that opportunity. When you look at business schools, for example, the top 2 business schools are Harvard and Stanford. If your child wants to become one of these great hedge fund traders or something, or they want to work for McKinsey, for example, getting them into these top business schools is oftentimes the best way for them to position themselves for those jobs. And the top feeders into the top 2 business schools, Stanford and Harvard, undergrad are Harvard and Stanford. And so there's a lot of reasons why, for their sake, what they're trying to accomplish, that it might make sense for them to go to these schools. But also from the liberty perspective, trying to create a society that embraces liberty and that will allow other people to live free. I argue that we need libertarian-minded or anarchist people in these schools. We need them in these schools because no matter what you feel about higher education, and I do think most of it's a waste, I think that they do more harm than good in most cases. The best reason to go to one of these universities, quite frankly, is for branding. It's for the resume. It's to open up doors. I acknowledge that. But the future leaders of society, at least the society that we have today, where brand does matter and where name, all those things do matter, prestige matter, come from these schools. And so I would like to see our children getting into these schools and being in position to actually influence things at that level, right? We all sit here and we make fun of politicians all day long. We make fun of people on Wall Street. We say how bad these people are, how bad the corporate heads are, how bad the lawyers are. And in most cases, we're right. But if we actually put our people in, we can push some of that out and they can dampen it to some degree. I personally don't want my kids being politicians or lawyers, but by going into the system, you can actually push other people out of the system, and then you can have an effect that way. But also, think about the people within our so-called movement, if you guys call it a movement, who have a lot of influence, right? Like Tom Woods, for example, right? Where did he go to college? He went to Harvard, right? Adam Kissel, who's runs FIRE, where did he go to college? He went to Harvard. Michael Strong, who's going to be talking here on Saturday, who does the Free Cities Initiative, and he's does a lot of stuff on education as well. Where did he go to college? He went to Harvard. Like there's a theme here where if we want to influence society, whether it's through academia, through business, through politics, a lot of times it does make sense to go to these schools in order to be able to have that opportunity. And hopefully, if enough people, if we're successful enough, we get to a point in society where these schools don't mean anything, where it doesn't matter where you went to school, and we have better ways of measuring who's talented and who has a lot of potential. And it doesn't just depend on these low-level screens, which are called resumes, and where people went to college. But in order to get there, I think that we do need to infiltrate academia, and we do need people, at these universities teaching as well. So that's my argument. My argument is the children who want to do it, the children who are in position to do it, that want to go that route to try to make change or to just be successful in life, is we should not only enable them and support them, but we should set them up so that they can get into these schools so we can have a bigger impact than just pockets of libertarianism throughout the country, but where we're actually affecting culture, where we're getting into the media and academia, and we're pushing stuff out that way. So that being said, I'm going to talk about how children can get into these schools if they choose to go that route. And if you guys want to argue with me why sending your kid to Harvard or Stanford makes no sense, that's fine. I'll have that argument, and I probably won't even argue with you that much. You don't have to send your kids there, and they're certainly not going to be failures in life if they don't. But if they want to go that path, and if they want to go ahead and break into certain sectors of society, then I think it's really important that we try to help them get there. And I just want to go ahead now and highlight how difficult it is to break into those schools. Getting into a Harvard or a Stanford is a lot more difficult than people think. And one of the problems with homeschooling is that your expectations as a child are really set by the people that you're around. And if the academic expectations are low, not because your family doesn't think much of you, just because they don't understand how difficult it is to get into certain schools, then it's going to be really hard to get to that point where if you do choose to go that path, it's just going to be hard to pass the screen, pass the filter. So I think it's important that we know how difficult it is to get into these schools if we choose to go that route. So I'm going to use Harvard University, which most people consider sort of the premier undergraduate institution in the world. And Yale people, Princeton people, Stanford people will disagree. But Harvard University, for the class of 2016, I'm going to use their numbers. They had 34,000 people apply, over 34,000 people apply for a class of about 1,650 people, right? So that's a lot of people applying. And most people look at that and they say, wow, a 6% acceptance rate. It's going to be really hard for my child to get into that school. And this is why if you're going to have that mindset where you want to set your child up to get into those schools, you have to start really early. You don't start when they're 14, 15 years old, because then it's too late. Because they need to have a certain base of reading and writing skills that most kids in America don't even come close to, and basic arithmetic, basic logic and understanding numbers, so that they can, one, do really well on their exams. Unfortunately, you have to take the SAT to get into Harvard, and SAT 2 subject tests. You need to take 3 of them. But they have to do well enough to perform on that, and they can't just perform decently. They have to perform off the charts good. And what I mean by that is if your child isn't scoring above a 750 out of 800 on all 3 sections of the SAT, your child's probably not going to get into Harvard. And I'll explain more why in a minute here. But 6% of all people who apply to Harvard get in. That, for pretty much everyone in this room, isn't the real acceptance rate if your child were to apply. Because there's a lot of groups that get into Harvard that most people in this room don't fit into. For example, legacies. Legacies are children of Harvard alumni. They're the ones whose parents, mother or father went to Harvard. And they have an acceptance rate of 30% as opposed to the general pool of 6%. So that means that 3 out of every 10 legacy kids will get in instead of 1 out of every 15. They make up 13% of the Harvard class. Then athletes, recruited athletes. Harvard's not even a good school when it comes to athletics. I mean, when you consider Division I sports. But they have 15 to 20% of their student body is filled with athletes. And those are often recruited athletes. Your child, unless they are a great athlete, they're not going to be in that mix. Then you have development cases. These are the sons and daughters of presidents, prime ministers, senators, CEOs of large multinational corporations, and just rich billionaires like people in the Rockefeller family. So those are development cases. They make up about 4% of the class. You have faculty children who also make up about 4% of the class. These are kids of professors, and their acceptance rate is around 30%. So all of a sudden, that class, of 34,000 applications, for total people who are accepted of 2,000 to get a class of 1,655 after some people choose not to go. That's not the reality that most of us live in. And then the last group is underrepresented minorities. And I'm looking out here right now, and it's mostly white. That seems to be what a lot of libertarians are. You're not going to get any benefits being a white person applying to Harvard as well. So let's just take out the underrepresented minorities as well. So if you're a white libertarian, not very rich, you clearly don't believe in the state, so you're probably not a senator. What we have is, instead of 34,000 people applying for 1,600 slots, we have 25,000 people applying for really only 640 slots left. And so in order to get into Harvard for an average person like you or I, your chances of getting into Harvard drops down to about 3%. So getting into one of these schools is really, really hard. And if you want to set your child up so that they have that opportunity, then you have to think really clearly about what type of opportunities you're going to give to them as they're growing up. I don't believe in coercive education. I think it fails children. I think that it puts them into a situation where they eventually burn out in life or they give up on the entire process of learning. And what we want to do is we want to create a society of lifelong learners who question everything and who will challenge the status quo and who will challenge experts, right? We have this problem in society where we defer to experts. Well, the scientist said this, the doctor said that, the general said this, so therefore it must be true. We want to create a society where people are questioning everything and really challenging what's going on. So if you want to get your child into one of these schools, it's a really easy process to get into. It's easy to get into these schools. The way I make money, my professional focus is on helping homeschoolers, helping their families try to figure out what's the best route for them. But the way I really make money is I do admissions consulting. I help people get into these colleges. And it's really easy to get some people in. If your parents are president, you're good. If they're a senator, you're probably going to be okay. If they're the CEO of General Electric, it's pretty easy. But like amongst this demographic, it becomes a lot harder. And in order to get into a school like Harvard or Stanford or Princeton, they basically have to, if they go to a traditional school, be the valedictorian, right? Number one in their class. It's really hard. And those schools aren't very good for allowing the person to grow as an individual and start loving learning. In fact, I argue that once you put kids in school, that begins the process of hating learning or fearing learning, and it dampens that quest for knowledge. But the best thing you can do is take them out of the traditional education model so that they can be valedictorian of their homeschool class, number one of one. So that way you take that out of the equation. But they have to love to learn. They have to be able to read extraordinarily well and write extraordinarily well. So if you're going to homeschool your child, and I'm a big fan of unschooling as well. I'm not a fan of not getting your child to read until they're 12 years old, though. It's going to be too late for them. If they want to go down that path, it's not going to be good. So you can still be unschooled, but you can model behavior for your children. You can get rid of your TV, and you can read for enjoyment. And you can encourage your child to read. It doesn't have to be coercive, but you got to get them to start reading and reading voraciously so that when it gets time to take that SAT, they're going to be able to max it out, and that puts them in a good situation there. Writing is another thing. Americans are terrible at writing and reading, and so you want to get your child to start writing as early as possible as well, and get some peer evaluations of their writing. And get other people, mentors, to come in and critique their writing so you can help them along. It doesn't have to be coercive. You can still be unschooled and have your children become really good writers. You just have to model it. You have to encourage them. You have to give them opportunities to do it. And then the math part is probably the hardest for a lot of homeschoolers and unschoolers, because at the end of the day, a lot of children do need to be led in a linear fashion through some of the basics of mathematics. But the point is that you got to get those three things. History doesn't matter, right? And the fact is, most of the people in here, if you homeschool your kids, you're probably going to spend a lot of time on history. You're going to talk about, oh my God, the Federal Reserve this. Did you know that the Civil War, and that is all fine and dandy, but it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things from an academic perspective. No one cares what they think about the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, or whether the Gulf of Tonkin was a false flag. It doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things academically. And if you teach, or if you enable your children to be learners, to really have this thirst for knowledge, then they don't have to learn what we think are important history lessons as children, in order to succeed in life, because they'll be able to figure that out. They'll read it. They'll want to go down that path, and you can encourage them to do that. Same thing with science. One of the big critiques against homeschoolers with science is like, oh, you have a bunch of religious conservatives who want to say that Jesus rode dinosaurs, and no one cares, right? It doesn't matter at the end of the day. In fact, most of the people who look down at religious homeschoolers for their beliefs, their religious beliefs, and what they're teaching their children, they're no better, right? They don't believe in the theory of evolution. They don't really care how life started. They just know that someone else has said that, and they accept it as religion, just like the people on the other side do. And neither one's good, right? We want to encourage our children to go seek out the answers and find out the real truth. And if they believe something, they believe it because they've either investigated it or they've read enough that they've come to the logical conclusion that, yes, based on what I've read, that makes sense to me. We don't want them just repeating whatever it is that we think they should know. And at the end of the day, the school doesn't care if your kid believes in evolution or creationism. They're just trying to get the best people into that school. So if you do all that, get them to love learning, be really good at reading, writing, and arithmetic, and they max out their SAT scores and their SAT 2 subject tests, then their chances of getting into Harvard are still terrible, unfortunately. The reality is that there's a bunch of people who do that, and there's a bunch of people at a lot of really great private schools, or really competitive private schools, including one that's here in New Hampshire. I don't know if it's Andover or Exeter, but they just feed people. They have like 30 people a year going to Harvard, 30 people a year going to Yale, 30 people a year going to Princeton and Stanford. And so if you can afford to send your kid to a boarding school for $30,000 a year, maybe they can do that for them as well. But for most of us who don't have those means and who care about our kids and want them to be with us in their most precious years, you have to give them something else. There has to be something special about that applicant to the college. Harvard, Harvard is a messed up institution, and they essentially take care of the aristocracy, however you want to define it, and they feed them into the industries that control society, whether it's banking or various corporations or whatever, military, in a backdoor sort of way. So there's a lot of problems with Harvard, right? But if you want your kids to get in there and actually make the change, Harvard at the end of the day wants to create the best class possible, and Harvard has to deal with the fact that they have to accept a bunch of legacies. They have to accept kids of Harvard grads because that's how they make money. Fundraising is really important for them, so they have to do that. Same with the development cases. They're bringing them in for the influence and for the money. So that's why if you're a senator, your chances of your kid getting to Harvard are really, really good. They need to bring in the athletes because they want to beat Yale at football, and they want to beat Princeton at basketball, and they want to win national championships. So they're going to bring those people in. And then you're left with this like really small pie of people for less than half the class that has to make up for all the rest of them. That they have to be the future Nobel Prize winners, the future researchers that are going to have breakthroughs in cancer, the future Supreme Court justices, the future CEOs of multinational companies. They need people who are going to end up doing that. And all of a sudden, they're dealing with a small portion of the class. Like less than half the class is left to fill with people who are going to do that. And at that point, they don't care that you're a libertarian. They don't care that you don't like the state. They just want to get the highest quality people into that school so they can go off and do great things. And so in order for your kids to get into these schools, if they choose to, and again, I personally believe that most people should not go to college, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm trying to push anyone into college, but if they choose to go that route, they have to be extraordinary, they have to be extremely gifted, they have to be the best in society at whatever they choose to focus on. And so 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it used to be that in order to get into these schools, everyone thought they had to be well-rounded. They had to be on 3 sports, they had to be captains of all, they had to be the president of 2 clubs, they had to be valedictorian. That was the way to get into some of these elite universities. Now it's the exact opposite. They don't want you to be well-rounded, because if you're well-rounded, you're probably not really extraordinary in anything. And they're looking for extremely gifted, talented people who accomplish things in their own unique way, and they become the best in the world, and then they bring a bunch of these people together, and that's what creates what they think is a well-rounded class. So you look at the people who get into these schools, you're going to have people who are ranked number 1 in the world at sailing, right? You're going to have people who started nonprofits that bring in millions of dollars a year to help impoverished kids in India. You're going to have people who started a company at the age of 14, and now they're they ran it for 4 years and they sold to Google, and they're worth $2 million now. Those are the people that they're looking for. And so if you're a parent who's working with a son or daughter who's focused on going that path, the best thing you can do is figure out what they're really good at, what they're interested in, what they're going to run with, and help them do that. And just focus on that. Let them make that their primary focus for their younger years. And it can be something that you think is completely absurd. Maybe they like tinkering with cars, right? And you're like, well, oh my God, he'll never get into Harvard if all he cares about is building cars. But if you encourage that, and if you harness that energy, and you allow them to really express themselves in that, who knows what he can do with that, he or she can do with that. They can open up their own body shop. They can end up creating a franchise. They can be building cars, for races or whatnot. And all of a sudden, when a school like Harvard is looking at their application, they're, okay, 4.0, 4.0, 4.0, 2400 SAT, 2400 SAT, 2400 SAT, valedictorian, captain of this, president of this, and they just see those people all day long. But what they're looking for are these people who pop off the application and have done something really remarkable with their lives at the very young age of 17. And that's what gets people into these schools. You have to do all the academic stuff. Don't get me wrong. They have to kick butt on all that stuff. And that requires a lot of prep and a lot of training, self-training ideally. But in order for them to get into these schools, they have to be extraordinary at something. And that's what allows them to be successful getting into those schools, but that's also what allows them to be successful at life. Because when children have a goal and they focus on it and they follow it through and they have accomplishments, isn't that the essence of what every responsible adult does? Like if you don't want to be just an employee who works for someone else, not that that's bad. If you choose that, that's fine. You just acknowledge that you're giving up your economic surplus to someone else. But if you want to be in charge of your life and you want to be financially secure and you want to go ahead and hit all of your personal goals, well, you have to be self-motivated. You have to be able to say, these are my goals, and these are sub-tasks that I'm going to take in order to reach that goal. And once a young person knows how to do that, then you can, let go of the reins as a parent, and you know that they're going to be okay because they're going to take that and apply that for the rest of their life, whether it's working for other people or doing their own initiatives. And so in this case, it doesn't even matter if you want your kid to go to an elite school or college at all, right? This is what every parent's goal ideally should be for their children. So whether or not you want your kid going to an elite school, the best thing that you can do for them right now is get them to the point where they are identifying what their passion is and then harnessing that and supporting them and helping deliver them to a place where they're not only acting upon what their passions are, but they're excelling at it. And if they can become the best in society at whatever it is, music, art, mechanics, engineering, writing, whatever it is, if they can become the best in society, then they're going to have a good life. They're going to have a life that is financially secure. They're going to have a lot of personal, intrinsic feeling of accomplishment. And they're going to find ways to open up opportunities for themselves in the future. And that's partly why I argue some people should go to these elite schools, because it opens up opportunities. But if you're working on the stuff that will actually get them into the university, then they're going to be fine anyways. And I also argue this to people. No one's ever taken me up on it. Once you get into Harvard or Stanford, you should drop out your first year. Because the only point of going to these schools for most people is for the branding, for the recognition, to get it on your resume. And unless you're going to become a doctor where you need to get an undergraduate degree in order to go to medical school to get a medical degree, if you're going to be an entrepreneur or a politician or any of these professions that don't require the certification process of the college degree, then the best thing that you can do is get into the school and then drop out and do whatever you want to do. So that's what I'm presenting to you. If you want your kids, if we as a society want to, in this subculture of the society, want to affect the rest of society so we can live freer then I do think that we need more people getting into these elite schools, and we need people using that as a platform to spread the message, to have a greater influence. And then, for example, I have a good resume. I have a good resume when it comes to my academic successes. I graduated from West Point, and I got my MBA at Stanford University. When I was arrested in 2012 because I saw 2 cops roughing up a woman, and I took pictures and started yelling at them, they came after me, attacked me, and then charged me with a felony. I was able to go out to the media and push that. Thank God someone across the street was also taking video. But what they ran every single story with, the byline was, or the headline was, West Pointer arrested by a cop, West Pointer, arrested for spitting in a cop's face, video proves it's wrong, all that stuff. If I never went to college, right, or if I went to a state school, which is fine, right? I put very little value on these degrees. But if I wasn't a West Point grad or a Stanford grad, I don't know that the media would have picked up on my story. And the same thing happens when you're a writer. If you're a writer, you can work really hard and you can become a great writer, but if you're trying to affect public opinion and policy, the stuff that you write, it's much more likely to be grabbed onto if the person has a certain degree, whether it's a PhD, an MBA, or a Harvard, Yale undergrad degree. So there is a lot of value to that. And then hopefully, if enough of us have enough of an influence on society, we can move to a point where these degrees are meaningless, and where it doesn't matter if someone went to Harvard or community college, trade school, or they never technically graduated high school. That's a place that I would like to see us get to. But in order to get there, I do think that there's a lot of value to going this way, getting into these elite schools. It's really hard, but it's possible. And at the end of the day, if you are doing the things to enable your children to be able to get into one of these schools, then whether or not they go to school doesn't matter, because they're going to be a success in life. So if there's any questions, I'd love to go ahead and address them. I would be happy to talk about the benefits of homeschooling and whether it's right or how to go about it, but I would much rather focus on some of the other issues as far as higher education, the branding effect, stuff like that, because I do think that there's going to be other speakers here this week who will talk about homeschooling, and in a lot of cases preaching to the choir, yeah, homeschooling's good, rah, rah, ray, ray.
Do you have recommendations for people who already have, let's say, an undergraduate or graduate degree from not a really fancy school like that, on how to get in for a PhD or grad school level? Yeah,
it's the same thing. PhD programs and other top graduate schools, they want the best candidates. That's the reality. Now, if you look at some of the best programs, like Harvard Law School, for example, and you look at who makes up their, I think they have like a 600-person class. Who makes that up? If you take out all the people who went to the Ivy League schools, Stanford and MIT and UC Berkeley and Duke, and maybe Amherst and Williams, which are elite liberal arts schools, if you take that out, you're probably left with a class of, that probably takes at least half the class, those 10 or 11 schools. And so it's really hard if you go to a less prestigious school in undergrad in order to break into it. But the same exact thing plays out that I just illustrated with trying to get into Harvard, right? You still have all your athletes and all your development cases and all that. Like, just consider these elite schools as part of that. They still need to fill the rest of their class with the most amazing people from state schools and small private schools from around the country. And in order to get in, you just have to prove that you're the best. And you have to be off the charts in every way. And one of the best ways to be off the charts is to graduate the top of your class. If you haven't graduated the top of your class, well, then you're stuck with that, right? You can't go back and change that. But you have to do really well on your test scores as well, your GRE for most people if they're going to do the PhD. But showing that you are the best, showing that you have a passion for what you do, and being able to put it out there for them to see is the best way to get into, say, a PhD program. If you say you want to go get a PhD in psychology so you can study the behavior of children with Asperger's and identify whether, the outcomes are based on, that or environment, genetics, whatever. I'm not a psychologist. So if you want to do that, then the best thing you can do is go do research on that and already begin the process, or go work for an organization that focuses on children like that, and then do really well and have these recommenders who are going to come forward and say this person is the best, they're going to become one of the best researchers in the country, and then when they look at it, then they'll be able to get over whatever it might be, whether it's not the best GPA or whether it's, I went to a community college, for financial reasons or whatever. But there's ways to get around it. But the earlier you start, the better. And if you want to be the best in anything, the earlier you start, and if you build up a track record, that is going to benefit you the most. It'll benefit you most personally because you'll have a sense of accomplishment because you're doing something that you love. But then when the admissions committee is looking at it, they don't say, oh, this guy says that he's been interested in this. He signed up for it last year. He's been doing something for 1 year. It looks fake. It looks contrived. But if you've been doing it for 4 or 5, 6 years, then it looks real and sincere. And if you have real accomplishments, then they'll take that into consideration.
Hi, I had a remark to. It's great to push for excellence, and I think I agree with a lot of the things you say, but I think your message would reach out more if it was applicable not just to the excellent people, but to everyone, because it's just like in the Prairie Home Companion, there's a Lake Wobegon where all the women are strong, all the men are handsome, and all the children are above average. But in practice, we're not all above average. Most of us are average. So I like what you said, but I think if you spin it in a way that's more the things that are applicable to everyone, that is, be the best at whatever you are doing. And
well, I do think it's applicable to everyone. And one of the points that I made was, even if your kid doesn't want to go to Harvard or Stanford, this is still the best path for them. Identifying what they truly love, identifying what their passion is, and helping them become the best at it. And then that's going to help them be successful in life. And contrary to popular opinion, most people who go to Harvard aren't geniuses, right? They are people who are well-connected. There are people with families who have driven them really, really hard. And they're people with just a passion to do one thing really, really well. And the average person at Harvard isn't a genius. The average person at Yale isn't a genius. They are just people who either by benefit of their families, have an in, or by benefit of their parents, drove them really hard, which I'm not a big supporter of. I don't believe in coercing them into success. Or they're applicants who are what I advocate people become, truly passionate and great at something. And everyone's great at something. Everyone's great at something at least relative to their place in society. In economics, it's called comparative advantage. You don't have to be the best fisherman in the world in order to have a really good living being a fisherman, if that's your comparative advantage. You just have to identify what your comparative advantage is and focus in on that and become really, really good, and that becomes your livelihood. That becomes your success. Do we have time for one more question? All right, last question. All right, well, no more questions. Thank you very much. If anyone wants to learn more, just talk to me this week. Also, you can go, Buehler Education is what I do, and we can collaborate on something according to that. Okay. Short question.
Why do you hate cops so much?
Yeah. Well, I'll address that tomorrow at the Peaceful Streets thing, but I think that in order to advance liberty in our lifetimes, the best way to do it is to enable a future generation that's going to embrace it, and I think that if you take them out of the coercive education system, that's the best way to free them up, and the biggest threat to our liberty today, locally, to the average person, is the local police force. So that's why I'm spending so much time on those two. Thank you very much.
Come your head down here beside me. The rain can't reach us here, it's safe and dry. The silence is a sea